Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Artists in Residences. My name is Kelsey. I'm going to be your host today, and we are going to be talking with two of our artist members, Kelly Mueller and Matt Morris. First, I would like to check in with everyone, just say that we hope you're doing well and that you're, living, staying healthy. Since we can't bring you into the gallery to see exhibitions right now, we are doing this twice weekly check-in with artists and artist members, since they can bring you virtually into their space and talk about what it is that they do. I want to take a brief second to thank Breck for letting us be in City Park, and to thank our members and donors, because without you, none of this is possible. Quick note on members and donors, we now are offering a $5, starting at $5 monthly memberships. If you want information on how to support the gallery, how to become a member, and benefits, you can look on our website under the support tab. So our website is batonrougegallery.org, and look for the support tab there. While you are there at batonrougegallery.org, you can also check out the Flat Curve Gallery, where we host latest editions of artwork created by members of our community and abroad. Artists of all ages are welcome to participate in the gallery. Like I said, we are going to be talking today with two artist members. Our topic is going to be color and composition. First artist member I'm going to bring on, her name is Kelly Mueller. She has been an artist member of the gallery since 2011. She lives and works in New Orleans, and she shows all around the Gulf and in the Southwest as well. We are very excited to talk to her about her mixed media works. We're going to be touching on color and composition. We're also going to be talking with artist Matt Morris. Matt Morris works in photography and mixed media. He has been an artist member since 2009. He currently lives in Baton Rouge, but has lived abroad for quite a while and brings a sort of European influence between art and architecture into his work. Without further ado, let me switch screens here and bring them on. Hold on just a second. We have Kelly and Matt. Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Hello.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just for the audience, so you guys know, we're going to be talking about color and composition, dogs, students, all kinds of things today. I am sorry about the glasses. I know there's a terrible reflection, but without them, I just can't see today. So it is what it is. For some reason, you guys don't have quite as terrible of a reflection as I do in the face area. So that's good.
You're wearing it well.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Some days, some days the eyes work, some days they don't. Anyway, I'd like to let the live audience know that if you have any questions or follow-ups to anything we're talking about, please feel free to leave it in the comments. We can see those and we can answer those directly. So ask away. Let us know you're here. Say hi. Just be nice is all we ask. Okay. So Matt and Kelly, hello. Hi.
Hey.
Hello.
I would like to start by asking you very briefly, and I can share my screen here so that the audience can see it. Perhaps starting with Kelly's work, let's talk about how you utilize color specifically in your work. I know with both of you, there's a lot of kind of recurring color notes from piece to piece that gives it kind of the signature look that says that it's your work. Kelly, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you use color in yours?
Sure. I have been using more and more neon fluorescence, and what this has really become for me in a kind of a symbolic measure is kind of a conflict between the natural and the synthetic. My work is largely about our natural systems and human tendency to kind of try to control those and make them our own. The fluorescence is kind of an entropy, a breakdown of that natural order. It's And a lot of times it is more synthetic, man-made. And so in a lot of my recent works, I'm using it as almost a disease that's pulling in the edges, even eating away at them. And again, it's really just kind of meant to be a synthetic or unnatural presence inside the natural world.
Sorry, I'm bringing myself back up here. Matt, do you want to talk very briefly about how you use color in your work? And I can pull up some of that as well.
Okay. I think of color really as a hook. In other words, I'm just trying to grab attention, pull in the viewer, get them to stay there and look. Rich colors that have dynamic interactions tend to do that. There's probably also a nostalgic component to it too. Ultimately, I'm trying to make my photographs have the presence of painting, so I'm going for really vivid colors that maybe aren't entirely natural. Kind of goes to something that Kelly was talking about. I'm not photographing the natural world, so colors don't really need to be natural, or maybe that's a reason why they're not so natural or more vivid or more synthetic. Yeah.
Do either of you, before you create your piece, take in like a color palette into consideration before you start, or does it happen more naturally as you're working through the elements of your work?
Do you want to put that first, Matt?
Color is a big part of the criteria when I'm looking for things to photograph. I guess I don't think of a palette first. I'm looking for things to shoot. So if a thing has great color, then I'm instantly drawn to it. But if it doesn't have good color and it's got great texture maybe, or great form, or maybe that object has a meaning or symbology to it, then I can always paint it. I'll spray paint it, or sometimes I use acrylic. I'm not interested in changing things post-process, so I try to get good color with the lens, and that's about the light and the exposure times, but about the objects themselves. So I'm looking for those colors when I'm looking for things to shoot, but also what you pair it with, that has an impact too.
Yeah. What about you?
That pairing is definitely a big part. I really, I never think of it in terms of color theory, but I recognize always that its presence. I always do try to limit my palettes, and a lot of times they are fairly unusual. I mix greens and purples and reds. It's a lot of times just omitting, okay, I don't want to add any more blues to this, or I don't have any reds, I don't want to add more red. Sometimes it's even a matter of the paints that I've collected on my table next to the wall as I'm working, as I begin to work. And I'm creating a palette, and so the 3 or 4 pieces that I'm working on at that present time are only going to include those particular colors, knowing again that compositionally I want to tie them together, even if they don't really work as a general palette. You would never think of putting those colors together, but if you balance them across the whole piece and use them throughout, then it still ends up working just like it does in life.
For both of you, I noticed a couple of reoccurring characters as well. Like, for example, Kelly, with your work, I paused on this one to talk about this. A lot of the recent work has this kind of frayed edge look to it. It's got this hot pink rope that kind of snakes throughout from piece to piece. Can you talk about that reoccurring imagery?
The rope and the frayed edges, sure.
Yeah, and also what they're made of, because it doesn't really show so much here, but in person you can see there's these itty bitty little like foam balls all around the edges of these pieces. So let's talk about that really briefly. What are we looking at when we see this?
Sure. I do spend a lot of time outdoors. I moved here from Chicago in '06, and I found that I couldn't go on a lot of hikes because you run into water, so I spent some time on the water instead. And through being on the water a lot, I am attuned to the fact that the water is the coastal wetlands are disappearing, and that's really what those edges represent. It's the deterioration of the coast, but it can also be a general deterioration, just a dissolving, a sickness, a falling apart, which again I'm just really interested in. That we network, we work together, or things tend to fall apart, or systems sometimes work against one another even naturally. So I kind of like that inherent conflict, but also the rope itself kind of acts as both a tying together. There are places where it becomes more of a nest or a binding. In other places, it's a restraint or a pulling down, or an entanglement. And again, it really just plays into the fact that everything is just really networked, tied together, connected, for better or for worse.
Yeah. For better or for worse? Tell me
for
about
better or for
worse. Kelly, while we're talking about your work, in the piece that I had up a second ago, which I'll bring back, we had a guest ask what was in front of the boars in this piece. So let me pull it back up. Hold on one second. There we go. So the comment is blocking it, but I'll take it down in just a minute. They were asking if those were vultures in front of the pigs. Can you talk about the birds?
Those are vultures in front of the pigs. I go out to, one of my favorite places to go is Hopedale and Shell Beach. And this probably sounds a little awkward, but it's what we do as artists. On the drive out, so the drive out is just as interesting to me as being out in that area. I ended up pulling over because there was a gigantic flock of vultures. I'm fascinated by vultures. They're really peculiar birds.
Me too. I love them.
They're fascinating, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah, even the way they fly. The way they fly is just so interesting and different.
Yes.
They kind of litter in the air. It's so weird.
Yes, and they're spying, they're watching. They're really kind of beautiful in their ugliness, and they really don't shy away from you very easily either.
No, they do not.
No. And I did get out of the car. There was this big group of them, and there was right next to the road a dead boar. So of course I took pictures, as one does, and that became kind of a kind of feeding for a lot of my ensuing pieces. I became really interested in the boar, and strangely enough, I think what you seek and are drawn to, you find very often. I was spotting a lot of boars in nature during that time. Fishing, and one was right on the opposite bank and just took a drink, and so that became another fascination, and somehow they kind of became interlocked as this that sometimes I connect animals together in these pairings, even if it isn't something that will naturally happen in nature, but because they came together in my experience. That kind
they're now a paired duo in your practice.
So it's kind of a Rudyard Kipling sort of weaving of tales in my head.
Yeah. So dovetailing off of that, Matt, I know that when we look at your work, I'll pull it up here in just a second. Personally, I've noticed a couple of things that repeat in your work, like the televisions. And there's certain kind of hot, like yellow or orange colors that come up again and again. While I get those pulled up here, do you want to talk about the repeating symbols that you look for specifically to put into your?
Well, the characters, I mean, there's deer and owls, crows, rabbits, lots of different animals. but there's of course televisions, they're about our culture, maybe a sort of weakness in our culture, but they're also these beautiful things that are interesting to photograph, especially those older televisions with the tube in it, a CRT television. I enjoy trying to photograph the static. It's kind of a challenge to photograph, the snow on the television screen. But there are patterns I keep going back to also. There's a TV there. I thought that I killed my television, or at least I tried to. I set it on fire, but it rose again from the ashes like a phoenix in the form of a cell phone. But and the patterns, like you see the pattern in that one, the black and the yellow stripes. These are some that I keep going back to. These are actually medieval. They're from heraldry, which goes to the ancient battlefield, identifying who is who. We see that now in traffic signage. It's just telling you which side of an obstruction you're supposed to pass. For me, it's a way to communicate without words. They work two ways. It's like a symbol of a rudimentary technology, but also as a compositional element, like look this way or look that way. Yeah. There's the owl with the television. And the deer and the antlers, I think ends up being a symbol of our hubris. We have these complex relationships with animals. How do we treat them? What do we do with them? What do they mean to us? How do we take care of them? That's what those are about.
Does the deer and the owl take on a specific type of role in your work? Like if we see a deer in your work, does it mean a specific statement, or is it more of a compositional choice?
It's I can't say that it means the exact same thing every time, but yeah, it's usually getting towards our maybe we're a little bit too confident in our relationship to nature, that we really ought to rethink it. The owl is wise, the crow is a reminder of our mortality, the rabbit is vulnerable. So yeah, they have certain meanings that probably do inform the understanding of the work.
Mm-hmm. So I asked you both on here today, knowing specifically that you work in different media. Matt being in primarily photo, kind of a mixed media place, and Kelly being on a more 2D flat surface, with the exception of a couple of installation works that kind of come out into the space that we inhabit. What do you think the main difference in composing works for 2D versus 3D space is? And either of you can take the wheel on this. Or I can assign somebody to answer first if that's easy. Well, Matt, since I have your work up, why don't you talk about what do you feel is the distinction when you're setting up these essentially still lives with this dramatic light? What would be the difference for you if you were composing this as a drawing?
I mean, in my mind, I'm constructing these like I would make a painting with the camera. I'm setting up the still life of these various objects. Sometimes there's painted paper, sometimes there's cut paper. So like you would draw from life or you would paint from life, it's kind of the same. And what I like about working this way is that I can make this setup and I can shoot it, and then if I'm not satisfied with it, I can see the immediate results and I can go back in and change it. To do with the space, there's usually a projected element in each one. Not always, but often there's a projected element. I just use a digital projector that I hook up to my laptop. The imagery is usually from my travels. The projected part is there to create a deep space in the piece, which is very persuasive. It's kind of classic, but the projector, it also adds shadows to some of those objects, and that kind of implies a shallow space, which is also kind of modern. So I like this tension that the projected image creates. that pull between an illusionistic space and a physical space, and that's what really brought me to using photography in this manner, was me trying to find a better way to make that kind of space that you see in an assemblage, like a shadow box type of assemblage, like you would see in a Joseph Cornell, who was a big influence on me very early on. So, you know, I really enjoy seeing things change and then being able to readjust it. The time of day makes the light change in the studio, and so I have to wait until the next day after I've repositioned everything. I'll change it, you know, literally hundreds of times, the way that you would change a drawing or a painting hundreds of times.
Sure.
Yeah.
Two quick questions for you, and then I'm going to ask Kelly the same thing. On the one that I've paused on here, when you look closely at it, you can kind of tell that the shadow from the little figurine feet is from a light source, but then there's a kind of blurred what am I saying? The part of the piece that's painted and the part that's actually three-dimensional, it's a little hard to tell in some point because there's a shadow painted into this little structure next to the feet. Did you intentionally have the shadow for the little figure have a similar angle to create that kind of odd 3D versus 2D space, or is that a happy happenstance?
No, that's intentional. I'm glad that you're describing that, because that
I didn't describe it well, so I'm glad you know you got what I said.
Means that I've succeeded in what I was trying to do, was to have that push and pull between the illusion of space and the physicality of space. You know, that painting, it's a small painting on paper, and it's resting on a table, and then the little plastic is from a figurine. It's sitting on top of the painting, and so I shot it outside so that I could get the sunlight to cast the shadow in the same way that the shadow was painted, as if it were cast from that building. So yeah, that's intentional.
And then we have one question from the audience that I'm actually going to ask both of you. From our YouTube page, Cyrus wants to know, how long does it take to make one piece of work? So in Matt's case, one finished, beautifully mounted, amazing circular photo. How long does this take you?
Some of them will come together, you know, in a matter of days. Others, it will take me weeks of shooting and then rearranging and becoming dissatisfied with it, and then starting all over again. You know, the ones that have a more complex setup or more staging in it, sometimes I'll work on those for weeks at a time. But and then getting it to finished product, you know, I mount them on wooden panels, and so that, after I get the print, that part takes another few days. So, you know, from beginning to end, it could take several weeks or a month in some cases. Yeah.
And then Kelly, let me pull up your work again, and maybe we can see the broader gallery here, so we can talk about, because you have created work in both 2D and 3D space. For example, this installation here, what are your considerations when you know you're going to make something that's going to come out into the viewer's physical space versus something that you know is going to remain flat, either on the wall or on the floor or wherever it remains?
I really like the idea of using the space. Again, I'm really inspired by venturing into nature. I've had a few residencies where I have been kind of in the wilderness, and I'm really excited to explore the environment and bring it back into the studio. So I feel like being able to walk into, between, around a piece rather than to just face it on a wall is much closer to the experience I want the viewer to get. I also... So
go ahead. I'll ask my question in a minute.
Okay, I really love working large. It's actually pretty difficult for me to work small. And that really does the same thing. If you're working large, you are enveloped by the piece that you're working on. It becomes your environment rather than a piece that you're holding and is precious and separate from you. It becomes it just surrounds you. You become part of it, and that generally is more the sense of what I'm going for in a piece. I want you to become part of the environment that I'm creating.
That actually dovetails really nicely. I was going to ask you, you had sent me a lovely, lovely picture. I believe it's this one here. Where are we?
I've been really, really fortunate to, because I teach, I have my summers off. It can be really difficult, I've found in my practice, to originate a new body of work during the school year. Generally, my years go from August to August. It's that kind of becomes the cycle for me. And summer is the renewal period. So I have gone on many residencies over the summer and have been very fortunate for that. This is at Dorland Arts Colony. That's in Temecula, California, way on the southern end. And I spent my days there hiking every morning, going in a different direction in the month there. And it's really secluded. You are in the desert, in a little cabin on a hill, and there's not a whole lot around you. I got to experience a wildfire, a pretty good earthquake in the middle of the night.
Yeah, California, that'll do it.
It was spectacular. It was like nothing I've ever experienced.
Was it one of like the jumpy kinds, or like the kind where you feel like you're on a boat?
I felt like I was in bed.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I was rolling and I had no idea what was happening. You wake up, you don't know where you are, and I'm rolling. I don't know what's going on.
Some things are falling off the walls that you only had to put up with pins. You have to learn your lesson. Yes, been there.
My gosh, it was crazy.
Yeah.
What an experience to have. So I got the full experience. You look at the Santa Ana winds would blow through the little cottage.
Oh, my sinuses hurt just thinking about Santa Ana winds. Ugh.
Oh, but it was so lovely. And on my hikes, I would I kind of feel like I befriended some ravens that were in the little canyon next to my cottage, and those show up in a lot of pieces. I ran into a lot of rattlesnakes and other snakes. Not in any bad way. I actually grew up with, my family had a reptile business growing up, so I like snakes. I was real excited to find them.
How did I not know this? I would have asked you so many snake questions. You just leave that out of all of your artist statements and bios. Matt, do you have some crazy background dealing with dragons too that I don't know about? Like,
no dragons, just snakes. Snakes and lizards. Lots of snakes and lizards. My family ran an exotic animal business for a few years. So going into the house was kind of like a rainforest. Got noisier at night.
I'm sure.
It's very friendly with the snakes, and very exciting to just, again, when you feel like you're seeking something. I ran in, they started referring to me as kind of the snake. It's like, how are you seeing all these snakes? It's like, I'm looking, I guess.
On the ground, there they are.
And yes, places like that. And you were talking about time frame. Just like Matt was saying, I think you
go back to your page here so we can take a look at your work and talk about how. So, looking at an individual piece like this one, how long would you say you've worked on something like this until you feel like it's ready for other people to put their eyes on it?
That is such a hard question to answer, because I don't generally work on one piece at a time. I work on several. That's how I like to work. And some of them cooperate, and they're just a piece of cake. They tell me exactly what they want. Things are right the first time I put them down, and it's done. Surprisingly, the biggest piece I ever did was that wasn't a mural. Was a 7 by 14 foot piece on quilted fabric, and it took a week on residency. But then I'll have other pieces that are on the wall for months, and I just can't find the way to resolve them. So I have to change it over and over again. Something like this, man hours, you might say, it's a full work week, a 40-hour work week, 30, 40 hours perhaps, if it goes well. If you're looking for actual start to finish average hours, I suppose. That's a 38 by 50 inch piece. So that's about right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, do you work on more than one piece at a time, or do you kind of focus in on one thing until it's right and then move forward?
I'm usually working on one at a time. I might work on a couple at the same time, but usually I find myself working on one until I can get it right, or I'll work on one for a long time, especially if it's kind of a large staged piece. Then it kind of takes up my studio, and I can't really do much else in that space. If it's a smaller one, then I might have more than one going at a time. But I generally work on one till it's done.
All right, I have 2.5 more questions for you. I've got a quick lightning round. First, we're going to take an audience question. This one is also from YouTube. Both of you, how do you market your work? Well, you can go to BatonRougeGallery.org and check out all their work for sale. But how else do you go about how else do you go about marketing your work?
I mean, that's one of the hardest things for me as an artist, and a lot of artists just aren't really good at that kind of thing, marketing, and so we rely on gallerists. And if I didn't have a gallery to do that for me, then I would be lost. So yeah,
it's so hard. It's so hard as a visual artist, I think. I know that there are unique problems to all dance artists, music artists and everything, but I personally am in the visual art world, and it seems like you need to have a business degree in addition to your arts degree just to get your work in other people's eyeballs. Like, you can make work all day long, but if you don't know how to get people to see it, then, well, it's just for you at that point, which is all fine and good. But if that's not your goal, there's so much more you have to learn even after you finish any kind of proper schooling. If that's the route you go, it's insane. 2 more quick questions. We're trying not to drag this on forever. I want to ask you, I know you're both teaching right now, and I'm going to ask you about how that's going. But first, I want to know, I see that you both make work that is both rectangular and some that just completely obliterates the idea of a rectangle. So tell me, respect or disrespect the rectangle? What do you prefer?
I like the tidy frame. I like the fact that it's pulled in. I used to have a professor, shout out to Joyce Mershta, that used to tease me about the fact that I had to have everything framed in and completed just so. But knowing that, I do like the idea that it can deteriorate, that it can fall apart, it can break. And so I try to be mindful of that, and when it's appropriate, let that happen.
It's been a while since I've worked with the rectangle. I was heavily influenced by where I lived with composition. Spent a decade in Central Europe. I was surrounded by medieval and Baroque in my everyday life, architecture and art. And in composition, I was influenced a lot by those vertical Baroque paintings, all based on the corners, all about diagonals, because there's so much going on in those paintings. They're so self-renewing, meaning that you can move from one area to the next, and there's so much to discover in every area. They're so really very engaging, and so I would emulate that quite a bit. But I also wanted to challenge myself. What if I take the rectangle away? If I'm always working with the corners, then what if I take the corners away? So I started working with the circle. Another reason for working with the circle was a step in my attempt to make the photograph look more like a physical object. I think photographs, if they're not presented properly, they can seem weak if you compare it to a painting or a sculpture, because it's behind glass, which is reflective, and it's like a physical barrier. And then you've got the frame, which is this support that kind of gets in the way of the experience. And so moving to the circle was another way of making the photograph more like an object. So I always mount them directly to a panel, like you would a panel painting, without any glass, without any frame. And then going to the circle was going even farther towards making it look like an art object instead of like a window into another world.
I have to jump in and ask, because that brings up an important question to finishing one's work. Both of you have made work that is primarily paper-based. And I don't know if you know this, but we live in southern Louisiana. It's wildly humid out here. How on earth do you compensate for the just insane humidity out here when you're making work that either floats on its own without a frame or the protective glass, or that's mounted on panel? How can you go about humidity proofing that sort of thing? And I know I said we were almost done, but I had to throw that one in there.
I just let it happen.
Don't say that. That's not what I want to hear. As someone who has to tend to those gallery walls, don't just let it happen. I need to know that you've protected this piece so that I don't have to freak out during a rainstorm.
It's protected. It's safe. It's so much coating shellac. It's covered. But,
There we go.
But I know that it's going to curl. It can curl. It can move. They're padded on fabric, so they are mounted. But it has bend. It has a little bit of deterioration until I put that protective coating on it. And again, I like that deterioration. I like that falling apart at the edges. But yes, that's kind of been a part of the Southern experience as well. It's been really interesting to see how differently the materials happen down here and how they kind of fall apart or curl up.
You enjoy making us walk into the gallery in the morning to do a curl check and straighten everything. And
apologies in advance or afterwards.
Matt, what do you do for your work? Do you humidity proof it, or do you let the chips fall where they may?
Getting away from framing really helped solve a lot of that. You know, it's mounted directly to panel, and so I don't miss those days of dealing with all that. So that solved a lot, mounting.
Man. Okay. One last audience question, and then I'm going to ask you guys how you're doing teaching. From Luisa Restrepo, she wants to know something you know now that you wish you knew as an emerging artist. So what is the tip you'd give your young self?
I have one word from myself: plastics.
Plastics?
Yeah, maybe do something else.
Maybe do something else. Wow, refrigerator repair. No. We encourage the arts here. Of course, you mean plastics in your still lifes, right? Yeah, there we go. What about you, Kelly? What would you tell your young self? That's not to imply that you're not young now. I meant, like, your 10-year-old self.
Okay, to the 10-year-old self.
Yeah.
I started out in the safer routes and did the other majors and then came back to art. Art is what I kept coming back to. I don't know that I would have changed it, but I would have been, knowing that was my love. I wish I allowed it from the get-go. And you can always kind of make the rest work out somehow.
It's better than plastics, Matt.
It's
Okay.
Plastics after.
Right. Okay, all right. Last question, honestly. I know you are both teachers right now. Matt, you are teaching at the college level, is that right? And Kelly, you're teaching at the high school level? Yeah? Okay. So what has this transition been like, moving from being in the studio, being able to look over your students' shoulders, being able to guide them as they create and compose a piece versus having to kind of just react to what they present to you? What is that like? What are your challenges? And what do you think you've actually learned from doing this?
I mean, it seems like getting students motivated is a major challenge when you're not seeing them in person. I was lucky enough to start the semester face to face, and so I had gone through the steps of basic camera operation where I really needed to show them hands-on. Here's how you do this. So we got through most of that. So we were lucky there, and also they got to know me, and I learned all of their personalities. So by the time we moved online, I knew I had some insight as to how to interact with each one of them individually. I think it would be very different if I was starting the course from the very beginning in an online manner. I think that would, be a lot more difficult to establish rapport. It would be hard to do that. I think that would be the toughest part of it, is establishing that rapport.
Kelly?
I couldn't agree more with the rapport. Imagining the possibility of starting a new year with new students going into this would have been a tremendous game changer. I think one of the greatest difficulties was that it's not just getting the students motivated, but so many of them had so many really huge challenges. It was really a lot to deal with emotionally and environmentally for a lot of them. Having their home life kind of changed dramatically. So a lot of the one-to-one discussions we wouldn't have had that rapport to start with. As far as the workload goes, I ended up front-loading the semesters for my students. And that's been really interesting. Usually I'll do project by project. We ended up doing a 2D COVID graphic novel to teach kind of the 2D elements and graphic design layouts. And
It's really clever.
It ended up being really interesting, and hopefully gave them a little bit of connection with it as well. But we ended up doing it, and they would learn all the elements at the beginning and then improve upon them with their feedback with each new set of pages that they turned in. And I really kind of liked working that way because they could take the last piece, find out what they needed to improve on, and apply that to the next one. And that way I feel like they're really learning. It might have been a smaller set of objectives, but I think they are really solid on them by the end of the quarter. So that's been really interesting.
So do you guys, so far, you're at the home stretch. Do you think you're going to make it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's glad. Well, listen, thank you guys so much for being here with me today. We really appreciate you. If you have any of your social media handles you want to plug or websites, please feel free to do so now.
BatonRougeGallery.org.
Yes, that's what I want to hear. All right, Matt and Kelly. Well, thank you so much. You guys have a good afternoon. Really appreciate you.
Been a pleasure.
Really enjoyed it.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That is our show for today. Please tune in on Friday where we're going to have another episode of Artist in Residences. Just as a reminder, today is another Giving Tuesday. It's called Giving Tuesday Today. You can go to our website to find out more information at batonrougegallery.org/join. Or when you go to batonrougegallery.org, look for the support tab, and then you can find out more information there. We can only do what we do because of our community, and we so appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you Friday.